The hour of 6:30 having arrived and more than a quorum having been achieved, I'll call to order the Common Council meeting of Tuesday, November 1st, 2022, and ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Alders Harrington McKinney.
Harrington McKinney here.
Here. Heck.
Here.
Here. Madison.
Here.
Here. Miazzi.
Present.
Here. Paulson.
Here.
Here. Fair.
Here.
Here. Tischler.
Here.
Here. Verveer.
Here.
Here. Vitiver. Here. Wahelia. I believe I see you on Zoom. Alder Abbas is excused. Alder Benford, I see you on Zoom. Alder Bennett.
Here.
Thank you. Present. Alder Carter.
Present.
Present, thank you. Conklin.
Present.
Present, thank you. Vice President Curry.
Here.
Present. Evers.
Here.
Here. Figueroa Cole.
Here.
Here. Foster.
Here.
Here. And President Furman. Present. Madam Mayor, we have quorum.
Thank you. All right, I'll start just by reminding us again, we're here to do the business of the people of the city of Madison, and so I would ask folks to be kind, to assume good intent, and to please refrain from using profanities in your remarks, whether you're on the council, staffing the council, or here to give public comment. We'll start with disclosures and recusals. Are there any disclosures or recusals on items on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll go on to the presentation of the consent agenda. President Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. A consent agenda is moved with the recommended action listed for each item on the agenda, including public hearings, except 1, items which have registrants wishing to speak, 2, items which alders have separated out for discussion/debate purposes. The following items are extra majority items. Extra majority vote items will be recorded as unanimous votes unless a roll call or exclusion is requested. Agenda item 48, Legislative File 74313, Water Utility Capital Budget Amendment related to Well 14 mitigation, 15 votes required. Agenda items part of the consent agenda with additional recommendations as noted. Agenda item 13, Legislative File number 74028, Assessments for the Cedar Street Assessment District, 2021 13th Aldermanic District. Recommended action is to refer this to the Board of Public Works on 11/23 and the Common Council on 12/6. Our finance meeting was yesterday, so there's a lot of recommendations from the floor. So buckle up. Agenda items with recommendations made from the floor. Agenda item 33, Legislative File 74114, amending ordinances related to designated holidays and compensation for uniforms, safety shoes, and tools. Recommend to adopt. Agenda item 40, Legislative File 7106. It's a substitute independent monitor contract. Adopt substitute. Agenda item 41, Legislative File number 74185. Program Assistant 1 in the Fire Department budget. Recommend to adopt. Agenda item 42, Legislative File 74243. Civilian Technician 1. Recommend to adopt. Agenda item 43, Legislative File 74291, a contract with Ready Rebound LLC, recommend to adopt. Agenda item 44, Legislative File 74307, purchase and sale agreement between the City of Madison and Habitat for Humanity. Agenda item 45, Legislative File 74309, purchase and sale agreement between the City of Madison and Centro Hispano. Agenda item 46, Legislative File 74311, purchase and sale agreement between the City of Madison and Centro Hispano. And agenda item 47, Legislative File 74312, lease agreement between the City of Madison and Centro Hispano. Recommend to adopt. Agenda item 48, Legislative File 74313, Water Utility Capital Budget Amendment related to Well 14 mitigation. Recommended to adopt, 15 votes required. Agenda item 49, legislative file 74317, purchase of goods from Burris Equipment Co., recommend to adopt. Agenda item 50, legislative file 74324, a resolution authorizing the mayor and city clerk to enter into a non-competitive one-year service contract with two optional two-year renewal terms with National Testing Network, Inc. as a consultant for the firefighter applicant process. The recommended action is that the Finance Committee did not take up this item yesterday. It was not on the agenda, but the fire department is requesting adoption without consideration by the Finance Committee. Agenda item 51, legislative file 74341, resolution for purchase of dioxin ion chromatography system, recommend to adopt. Agenda item 52, legislative file 74326, appointment of James O'Keefe for confirmation of a 5-year term as the Community Development Division Director, recommend to adopt. Agenda item 53, appointment of Transit Chief Maintenance Officer, recommend to place on file without prejudice. Agenda item 54, legislative file 74373, appointment of Rachel Johnson for confirmation of a 5-year term as the Transit Chief Administrative Officer, recommend to adopt. Agenda item 60, legislative file 73935, license with New Singular Wireless PCS LLC, recommend approval. Agenda items excluded by 1, request of Alders, or 2, due to speakers registered by 6:30 p.m. on October 25th. Agenda item 34, legislative file 73982, a substitute prohibiting meetings on holidays, Alder Wahili. Agenda item 35, legislative file 73988, simplifying the consent agenda process, Alder Wahili. Agenda item 36, legislative file 74141, substitute amending the Madison General Ordinance to update Alder terms, Alder Wahili. Agenda item 37, legislative file 74328, amending Madison General Ordinance related to the Police Civilian Oversight Board, Alder Wahili. Agenda item 52, legislative file 74326, appointment of James O'Keefe for confirmation of a 5-year term as the Community Development Division Director, Alder Furman, removed as a confirmation hearing. And agenda item 54, legislative file 74373, appointment of Rachel Johnson for the confirmation of a 5-year term as the Transit Chief Administrative Officer, Alder Furman, and remove as a confirmation hearing.
Right. Thank you, President Furman. Are there other items that Alders would like to have excluded from the consent agenda? Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. I ask for separation on the following items from the report of the Alcohol License Review Committee. They are agenda items 9, 24, and 25. Again, agenda items number 9, 24, and 25, please. This is
Items
a
9,
request of city staff.
9, 24, and 25 will be excluded from the consent agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Are there additional items that Alders would wish to have excluded from the consent agenda? Not seeing any other hands. So then let's just make sure that we're all on the same page. We have additional recommendations on the following items. 13, the recommendation is to refer to the Board of Public Works. 40, the recommendation is to adopt the substitute. 53, the recommendation is to place on file without prejudice. And then the following are recommended to adopt: 33, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, and 60. And then items that will be excluded from the consent agenda are 9, 24, 25, 34, 35, 36, 37, 52, and 54. Are there any additional items? All right, seeing none, President Furman?
Move adoption of consent agenda.
The consent agenda has been moved and seconded. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of the consent agenda? Seeing no objection, the consent agenda is adopted. That will take us to public comment. I do not believe we have any registrants wishing to speak. There are a number that are available to answer questions. If anyone has questions for any of those registrants, now would be the time. Seeing none, we will go on then to item 9. President Furman?
Mayor, if there's no objection, can we take up the confirmation hearings before we get into the rest of the agenda?
Absolutely. So I believe the first one is item 52, which is Legistar 74326. I'm very pleased to submit the appointment of James O'Keefe for confirmation of a 5-year term as our Community Development Division Director. Mr. O'Keefe is here with us. And so first, let's get a motion, please.
Move adoption.
Moved and seconded. Are there questions for Mr. O'Keefe, or would you like to speak? Jim? Not seeing any questions.
So Mayor, it was 10 years ago that I appeared in this room for my first confirmation hearing. You and Alder Verveer, the only 2 other people in the room that were.
I was here. Sorry.
All right, so I've lost 1 vote. But I do recall, Mayor, that you alone asked a question of me that in retrospect I think was intended to suggest that maybe I didn't fully understand what I was getting myself into, and as it turns out, you were right. I think I understand a bit more what I'm in and what I'm about to sign up for another 5 years for. So I just want to say that I'm very grateful to be part of the team in the Community Development Division and in the larger city and with our community partners that I'm a part of in this role. And that I appreciate and never take for granted the support and the confidence that this council and this mayor continue to place in us and in me. And so pledge to do all that I can to continue at the highest level that I can in service to this city.
Thank you, Jim. Alder Harrington McKinney?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When I first became Alder, and I would be in a room with Jim, I'd wonder, does he actually care about what I care about? I can say without a doubt that he cares about what I care about and has demonstrated that over and over again. And oftentimes when I ask questions, I already know his answer, but I just need to hear it to reaffirm that he is the right person for the job. And so we've had many discussions back and forth, but he's always been willing to sit and walk me through the process. He has never been curt with me. He has never been condescending with me. And sometimes I would say, make it simple, make it simple. And he spent time with me. And I just want to publicly say thank you for that. You're absolutely the right person for the right job. And it's not been easy. I guarantee you that, but he's stuck, he stayed, and I appreciate his integrity. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa Cole?
Thank you, Mayor. So I don't usually take space to talk during confirmation resolutions. However, I don't want to add things to my very, very short list of regrets. So Here I go. I heard Jim's name just a few days after being sworn into office during a conversation about the unsafe living conditions for the unsheltered population at Starwater Creek. After that conversation, I requested a meeting with Mr. O'Keefe to get his input and to better understand the city's plans for the ever-changing situation. This was my first official conversation with the city staff, and I had zero expectations. Our first two calls were centered around the humanity of those experiencing homelessness. By the third call, Mr. O'Keefe turned into Jim the titles and positions of authority that so often become barriers to progress and are used by many as power play were immediately removed. Jim's knowledge of process and policy, his willingness to redirect me towards the right answer when needed, his care balancing financial decisions, especially when the decisions are not popular with the masses, with service providers, or even with us Alders, are some examples that speak to his character. His character and integrity have earned my respect. His guidance and his help introducing me to other agencies' gurus have made my job as Alder less difficult and more effective. I want to thank his wife, Barbara, his kids, Aubrey, and especially Aubrey Jean for sharing Jim with the city of Madison over the years. Thank you, Jim, for all the contributions to the city and your willingness to continue to support Madison and your capacity as Community Development Division Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder.
Thank you, Mayor.
Alder Fair.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just be real short. Jim, I've served on the CDBG committee since I started, so all those 10 years with a little break in between. And you've been just an amazing person to work with. Your leadership is as steady as I've ever seen anyone's leadership, and I mean that in all the best way. And I just really appreciate your dedication to the city, your dedication to our committee, to the city at large, not just the city proper. And I just value your partnership and our friendship. So thank you, and looking forward to continuing to serve with you.
Thank you, Alder. If no other Alders in the queue wishing to speak, so it has been moved and seconded. Is there any objection to recording an enthusiastic, unanimous vote in favor of confirmation? Seeing no objection, we will record that vote. Congratulations, Jim, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Then our next confirmation hearing is item 54, which is Legistar 74373. I'm pleased to submit to you the appointment of Rachel Johnson for confirmation of a 5-year term as the Transit Chief Administrative Officer. President Furman?
Move approval.
It's moved and seconded to approve. I don't think that Rachel is here with us on the Zooms, but I hope that you'll all have a chance to meet her and to work with her as Justin builds out his management team at Metro. Are there any questions? Or is there any discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 54. Thank you. And that will take us back to item 9. President Furman.
If there's no objection, I'd like to move a motion for item number 9 and 24 since they're related. I would move to refer item 9 and 24 to the ALRC meeting on 11/23 and back to the Common Council on December 6th.
So the motion is to refer items 9 and 24 back to the ALRC. Is there a second? And we'll recess the public hearing on those items and move to refer both of them back to the ALRC. Is there any questions or discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of referral? Seeing no objection, those items are referred. That takes us to item number 25. President Furman? Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. It's actually the same motion. I move to re-refer agenda item number 25 to the Alcohol License Review Committee. And with the second, just let me explain first, apologies to my colleagues that these three items only were brought to my attention this afternoon after the proposed consent agenda document was prepared. So that's why you're hearing them now for the first time. The two items we just disposed of and this item all have technical issues that were brought to my attention by city staff and asked that they be, as I say, re-referred back to the ALRC. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. The motion is to re-refer to, is there any questions or further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of re-referral? Seeing no objection, item 25 is also referred. That takes us to item number 34, which is Legistar 73982, a substitute prohibiting certain meetings on certain dates. President Furman, let's get a motion, please.
Move adoption of substitute.
Moved and seconded to adopt the substitute. On item 34, are there questions for staff? Seeing no questions, is there discussion on item 34? Alder Wahilahi?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just would like to get some clarification for this particular item. There was another ordinance passed, and it's a little bit confusing. What's the difference between 33.01 and this one, the new ordinance? So just some clarification as to what are prohibited in terms of when the city committees and commissions cannot hold meetings.
Thank you, Alder. I'm going to interpret that as a question for the city attorney.
Yes.
There is an existing ordinance regarding the holidays that the council cannot meet, MBCs cannot meet, but there is not an existing ordinance regarding public information meetings, which would be meetings sponsored by or hosted by agencies. And so that this ordinance proposal does prohibit those meetings on the designated dates that the council is, or that other BCCs are not allowed to meet. There is an existing ordinance, as I said, about holidays, which is repeated in this ordinance, but I think it's the sponsor's view that it does not hurt anything to have it included in this section of the code as well.
Alder, does that answer your question?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. President Furman, you were next.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to offer clarity and some information on the discussion we had at the Common Council Executive Committee about this. When this was created, I was told by the Attorney's Office that meetings were not prohibited on the council holidays, and that is why it was generated. We talked about it at the Common Council Executive Committee and decided because there was confusion, it'd be nice to have it in this second place. But there's also some clarity that's been added. Obviously, as Attorney Haas had mentioned, this does prohibit informational meetings. And we added some additional clarity with the substitute to make it clear that committees can meet on budget presentation days, but they cannot meet on days when budget amendments or the budget is being considered. We have a very, very long list of holidays, and we have a lot of committees, and so we made the recommendation that it would be okay if a committee was able to schedule a meeting on the day of a budget presentation, but obviously not when amendments are being considered. So just wanted to provide that information from the Common Council Executive Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, President Furman. Alder Carter, questions?
Yeah, this is for Attorney Haas. I'm looking at the ordinance right now, is there a link or will there be a link to the holidays? Or does the staff person have to go back and look at the section where the holidays are? I just want that clarification.
Well, currently, the ordinance does not include a link
Okay.
back to those holidays.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. I think commonly we post the holidays on the website for staff. And they should also be available in EmployeeNet, assuming the ordinance passes. Are there further questions? Seeing, President Furman?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want everybody to know that the Common Council office has actually created, I think it's out for about 5 years, a list of all the upcoming holidays, and that information has been provided when requested and certainly will be shared with committees. So they'll have that very long list, several years out. So it's clear what those holidays are.
Thank you, President Furman. Alder Harrington McKinney?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just for those who are with us virtually, when the body of the draft says sub-unit, could you speak into what sub-unit, so there won't be any misunderstanding what that is?
Sure. Subunits are defined in the ordinances basically as boards, commissions, and committees, and any subunits of those bodies, any subcommittees of those bodies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Are there additional questions for staff? Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded to adopt. Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 34. And that will take us to item 35, which is legislative file number 73988, amending the Madison General Ordinances to simplify the consent agenda process. President Furman, a motion, please.
Move adoption.
Moved and seconded to adopt. Are there questions for staff on this item? Alder Wahilahi.
Thank you, Mayor. Just some clarification as what will be the change and when it will be effective to make those changes.
Attorney Haas.
The proposed ordinance would delete listing on the consent agenda document those items that are struck out, any public hearing items, and recommended actions of those public hearings, and the required supermajority votes. It would continue to list any recommendations or referrals that are not printed on the agenda, and this would become effective as all ordinances. If the council passes it, it's approved by the mayor and then published, which normally takes about a week or two.
Are there further questions?
No.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any additional questions on this item? Alder Harrington McKinney.
Yes. I guess my question is that we want to simplify the consent agenda, and I understand that that is for the efficiency as we conduct city business. But is that in any way making it more difficult for the public to understand what's the business before us and what business is not before us?
Alder, I haven't looked at it in detail, but I would contend that it actually makes it easier because it removes items that are already included in the agenda from the consent agenda. That is, what will be printed on the consent agenda and what we're calling attention to are actually the things that are different or new.
So what I hear you saying is physically removing those items, but we're incorporating those items within the context of the agenda.
Yes, so everything will still be on the main agenda. What we'll be doing is clarifying and bringing to people's attention the things that are different from what's printed on the agenda, which is really what I think we need to be looking at in the context of what's read out loud in the meetings.
And so, Madam Mayor, I thank you for that, because oftentimes when we process according to Alder's understanding, and the general public has no idea and are not able to track. So, some of the questions might be relevant and understood by us who sit in the chamber, but it's totally confusing to the public, and that's the public that we're trying to educate. So thank you very much for taking the time and explaining.
Absolutely, Alder. It's my pleasure, and I agree with you that our processes are often confusing, not just to the public. Are there further questions on item 35? Seeing none. It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 35, and we'll move on to item 36, which is legislative file number 74141, a substitute amending the Madison General Ordinances to update Alder terms. President Furman.
Move adoption of substitute.
The substitute is moved and seconded. Are there questions for staff on item 36? Alder Wahilahi.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This particular ordinance, it's a little bit confusing, and I would like maybe get some clarification. Number one, and number two, does it have to go through referendum in terms of the term limits for the alders? So two things is clarification of the changes, because I see there are some, it's not 3 years, 2 years, but each district is different, and it's a little bit confusing, and I didn't get the gist of it. But also, does it have to go through referendum for these changes? Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Attorney House?
Yes, this is would affect a charter ordinance, and so if it is passed by the council, it would need to go to a referendum in the spring election in 2023. The basic intent of the ordinance is that in the end, there will eventually be 3-year terms for all alders. But of course, to get to that stage, the ordinance proposes staggering terms beginning, if this would pass here at the spring election, then starting in 2025, there would be staggered terms. Some districts would have 2-year terms, some 3-year terms, and some 4-year terms. And so those in 2025, those who are elected for 2-year terms, then in 2027, they would then be elected for 3-year terms until we get all alders on the same cycle.
Alder, does that answer your question?
Can you clarify, like, for example, if this goes through the referendum, when will it be effective? And each year, you're saying that maybe some alders will have 3 years, but then the renewal of the election is another year. I didn't get quite your last statement. I'm sorry.
Sure.
If you can clarify.
Sure. So if this went through in 2025, there would essentially be 3 sets of elections. Some alders, about a third of the alders would be elected for 2-year terms, a third would be elected for 3-year terms, and a third would be elected for 4-year terms. Then when those terms expire, the next elections will all be for 3-year terms. And so you will end up with 3-year terms, but the entire council will not be elected all at the same time.
I will hold on to my question, Madam Mayor. I know there are people who are waiting on line, so go ahead.
Thank you, Alder. It might be illustrative to lay out the years and think about the length of the terms. But we'll go on to additional questions. Alder Bennett?
Yes, so I understand from reading this that the approval of this ordinance change will be subject to the referendum in 2023 election. And seeing Alder Rehellier's question, quite frankly, I'm still kind of confused about how this is working, even though sitting on CCC and seeing this before. So I'm wondering, how are we going to phrase the question on the ballot so that and educate the public so that they can make a decision as to whether or not they support this?
Well, the city can attempt to educate the voters. The city just cannot advocate for a vote one way or the other. So, as you may recall, when the city posed advisory referendum questions, there was an effort to produce materials and videos to educate the public about what those questions were all about. And so the city can certainly do the same if this passes.
Okay. And has this, if we do the questions process, how does it go through some sort of equity review to see if like the questions are phrased in a manner that everyone can understand? Because we've seen in the past how, not necessarily with the city, but in the past, referendum questions can be confusing and not really transparent to the average voter.
Well, I guess I can take a crack at answering that. I mean, we could certainly bring back a draft of the question to the council to be approved. It just has to be approved by, I think, the end of January to be on the ballot in April. So if this passes, we could certainly bring draft questions back for the council to approve.
Okay. And just aside from the referendum, have we ever completed a sort of racial equity justice, what is it called? RESI report over like how this ordinance change will affect the makeup of Common Council?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter, questions? Alder Carter, you muted.
So many questions, Mayor, so many questions regarding this. Number one, I think we need to be educated first before it goes to the public. But Attorney Haas, I'm sorry, Attorney Haas. I didn't mean to demote you. In the end, it will be 3-year terms. So am I correct on that part?
That is correct.
Okay, so but it still will be staggered, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And how were these districts selected? For the 2-year, 3-year, 4-year, back to 3-year?
The sponsors can certainly address that, but my understanding is that there was a desire to have a geographic mix in the 2, 3, and 4-year terms initially.
Okay, thank you. I have a lot of questions, but I won't take up the council's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Carter. Alder Evers?
Thank you, Mayor. The question for Attorney Haas. A matter before this body is one of voting for Alder, regarding Alder pay, to change Alder pay. And it's my understanding by ordinance that a council as defined can only vote for a benefit such as a raise in pay that a future council would enjoy, would benefit from. We would be shifting from this idea of like Congress, which representatives currently at 2-year terms, and you call it the 107th Congress or whatever. We would no longer have this sense that this council, everybody the same, being elected the same, the terms being coincident and running concurrently. How does that impact that ordinance about voting for alder pay? Would it mean in the future that alders would be disqualified from participating in an increase in pay until their future term? You know, let's say in this transition time, you know what I mean?
Right.
And they're not, or since they're staggered, I guess I'm confused as to what that would mean in terms of the ordinance. And perhaps it's a matter that the sponsors can answer. If you don't know the answer to that, Alder, I mean, Attorney Huska, twice now you've been called Alder. Yeah, is my question clear? To me, it's my understanding that we can't vote on our own pay as a body because it's a current council. It's only a future council that can benefit it. What would you say to the question?
Sure. And I would first say it's not unusual to have staggered terms. Many municipalities do. And so this is an issue that they would confront as well. It's the basic rule, as you said, is you cannot vote to raise, an alder cannot vote to raise their own pay during their term. And so if, just say you were voting, the council was voting to raise pay for alders starting in 2023, well, if you were still in the middle of your term, that would not go into effect unless you were reelected. If you were reelected in 2023, 2024, 2025. So it would not go into effect until your current term of office has concluded. Now that does, you know, if the ordinance also, as the current ordinance does, provides for regular increases, annual increases in pay, those could go into effect. But any new increase would not go into effect unless an alder is reelected or until the new term for that district.
So if I understand you correctly, an alder could vote yay or nay on that, but would have to wait until the next 3-year term to either be reelected or that benefit would then pass on to the subsequent holder of that seat, correct?
That's exactly right, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Evers. Alder Foster, questions?
Yeah, Mira, I could provide a response to Alder Carter's question, or I can hold that till discussion.
No, go ahead, Alder.
Thank you. So Alder Carter, you had asked about how the selection of the districts happened for the staggering. I sent out a PDF, and I hadn't prepared it for general consumption, but the original proposal grouped the city's districts geographically, east into one group, west into another group, and central south into another, with the intent to have those all get elected at the same time. And the concept was to make it sort of easier and better for kind of public awareness around that cycle for local news, et cetera. Say, oh, it's this year in Madison, all of the East Side Alders or North and East Side Alders are up for election. After discussion at CCC, there was a recommendation that it might actually be better to not have all the alders in a certain region of the city be up at the same time, similar to the reasons for staggering the alder terms in general. And so instead, the recommendation out of CCC was to actually intentionally have a mix of all areas of the city for each election cycle. So basically, the original proposal had those color coded in that document I sent out, pink, yellow, blue. And after the recommendation of CCEC, you can see on the bottom, basically just went through and took each of those regions and separated them into the 2, 3, or 4 year terms. So that's what was used in the proposal that's in front of us right now.
Thank you, Alder. Right, I think Alder Miadze was next.
Thank you, Mayor. When I was elected a couple of years ago, I know it was on the ballot about 2-year terms and also alder wages. So I really think that we need to have more of a robust conversation, including...
Alder, we're still in questions.
Oh.
Do you have a question?
I guess I'll save it for a discussion.
All right, thank you, Alder. Alder Fair, questions?
Yep, thank you, Mayor. Just a clarifying question, Attorney Haas. So if this were to pass tonight, you would write up a draft for the, what's the word I'm looking for?
Referendum.
Referendum, thank you. And it's not imperative that the council reviews that. That's not part of, that's not, legally, we don't have to review that, but perhaps you would bring it back to us for review.
We certainly have time, so we could.
Okay.
If the council wishes.
Just want to clarify. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Harrington McKinney, questions?
Madam Mayor, when is it in order to offer substitute?
Let's get into discussion first, Alder.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. All right, Alder Bennett, additional questions?
Yes. Okay. Again, on the referenda question, I was wondering, because it seems to me, I'm just going off of my own personal idea of this, the issue of staggering the terms and having 3-year terms are kind of 2 separate issues about how we want our council makeup. Some people could support staggering our alder terms and not support 3-year term limits. So I'm wondering, in the current form of this ordinance, could there be 2 separate referenda questions on the ballot, or would with the one ordinance change, or would we have to separate the ordinances to put that on the ballot? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, Alder.
It's completely up to the council what questions you would want to submit. So typically a referendum is worded as, shall the city adopt the following ordinance? And then we just print the ordinance. And then it's a yes or no question. If the council wanted to pose 2 different questions, it could certainly pass that as part of this ordinance.
So Alder, it is possible to do 2 separate questions. I would just note that we did an advisory referendum on the question of term lengths. It was not a question on 3 years, but it was a question on increasing to 4.
Right.
Do you have other questions, Alder?
No, but I will just put in a note. Attorney Haas, I just emailed you. Could you check it? Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Wahila, questions?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, the staggering alder term, it's still is very confusing. But the other question I have is, for example, this is adopted in 2023 election. So will this be effective in 2025? That's one question. The other question is, this will only be done during the spring election. So the dates and the time of the election will not change. It will always be every 3 years or instead of 2 years. So the timing of the election will change to 3 years. And will that have some potential budget implication? Because I know running election, it's very expensive, especially municipal election. So I'm just curious as this, if it will be the same time, spring election, 3 years. Yeah.
Yes, elections for alders by statute are at the spring election in April. I'm not sure if there's another question. As I said, there would be some alders elected every spring instead of all alders elected on a 2-year election cycle. And as I said, this is, it's completely up to the council, but this is not out of the ordinary. There are many municipalities that maybe have a 4-year term and half of the council is elected every 2 years.
So Alder, you asked 3 questions, I think. Your first question was, when does it take effect? And the answer would be 2025. They would continue to be spring elections, but since we have a spring election every year, it would not be any additional elections, right? Because currently we alternate years with the county. So the county board supervisors are up 1 year, the council is up the next year. And you'll recall, I'm sure, that the school board currently rotates so that every spring election there is some member of the school board is up for election. So we wouldn't be adding additional elections.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think that's the question I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter, questions?
Yeah, I think that, I have a question, Mayor, thank you. And this is for whoever can answer it. So in 2025 election, the 2-year would be up in 2027, the 3-year up in 2028, and the 4-year up in 2029. And then everybody would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't guarantee my math, but everyone would be at 3 years in 2029. And 3 years, in the election of 2029, and that would be up in 2031.
No, Alder. So in 2025, you'd have everyone elected either to a 2, 3, or 4-year term. For the people that were elected to 2-year terms, they would be reelected or up for reelection in 2027 for a 3-year term. If they are elected to that 3-year term, they would be up again in 2030 and onward, right? The people who were elected to a 3-year term in 2025 would be up in 2028. And they would be elected for a 3-year term in 2028, which puts them at 2031 for their next reelection, right? And the people who were elected to a 4-year term in 2025 would be up for reelection in 2029 for a 3-year term. So then everyone would have 3-year terms, but they would be staggered. So approximately a third of the council would be up for reelection for a 3-year term every year going forward.
Would it be every year, or would it be alternating with the county?
No, it would be every year.
Every year. Uh-huh. Okay, I told you I had a lot of questions, Mayor.
That's fine, Alder, but do you have additional questions right now?
No, I'm going to give it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Tischler, you were next.
Yeah, looking back at the spring 2021 referendum, I guess it was asking for public input on the length of terms, and I guess can you remind me how people voted if for 4-year terms or keeping it at 2-year terms?
President Furman, I think, can answer that question.
Sure. So referendum number 3 was a 4-year term question, and it very specifically said Madison alderpersons are currently elected to 2-year terms. The Madison mayor is currently elected to 4-year terms. Beginning with the 2023 spring election, should City of Madison alderpersons be elected to 4-year terms? And Yes got 45% of the vote with 24,550 votes, and no got 55% of the vote, 30,595 votes.
A follow-up question, Mayor?
Yep.
So I guess, we're asking for 3-year terms, eventually being for all of us once everything gets in sync. And I guess I'm wondering why we aren't just looking at keeping to 2-year, just alternating 10 and 10.
Alder Tischler, I think that's a question on the intent of the sponsors, which they can certainly speak to once we get to discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Alder. I had additional questions, but they seem to have disappeared from the queue. So are there any additional questions for staff on this one? Seeing none, then it's been moved and seconded to adopt. Is there discussion? All right. Alder Foster, I believe you weighed in first.
Thank you, Mayor. I will speak to the intent of this as one of the sponsors. So this, is an extension of the recommendations from TFOGs. We just heard the results of the advisory referendum question for a 4-year term, which was not approved, 45 to 55. This really comes from, I think, 2 goals, and we discussed it, I think, at least twice at CCEC. There was some really good discussion. I originally put forward a 4-year staggered proposal, and what we have in front of us tonight is the result of the discussion and recommendations of CCEC. Really, the 2 main goals of this move is, number one, to start staggering terms. I think there was broad agreement from CCEC members that the current practice of having all alders up for election at the same time, I think the last 2 elections at least were 50% or almost 50% of the council turned over at the same time. And it's, I think there was broad agreement that that's not really good for the institution, the people in the jobs, or the people of Madison. So I think there was a lot of interest in the staggered terms. If we kept it at 2-year terms, it would improve it by only having half of the council up at one time. But with the similar ratios of the turnover, we could still be looking at then a quarter of the council turning over every year, essentially. So looking at longer terms allows for more and better staggering. That was part of the rationale for the 4-year term. You'd have only a quarter of the seats up at a time. But with a 3-year term, you still have at least only 1/3 of the seats up at any given time. And then I think there also was broad agreement and support by CCEC members that a 2-year term is in itself just very short. Really, if you're elected to a 2-year term, it's very problematic in being able to really just get onboarded and do the work that's needed, and then turn around and, if you're interested, run again so quickly. So there was a lot of discussion between 4-year and 3-year, kind of split, I think, among CCEC members. But ultimately, it seemed that there was perhaps a little bit more support for the 3 years, feeling that 4 years is maybe a bit too long. And so that's what this recommendation in front of the council tonight, how it got to 3 years and staggered.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Miadze. Don't press your button again, Alder.
Thanks, Mayor. Sorry to jump right into the discussion, but like I was saying before, given that when we were elected, what I ran on was the referendum that said a 2-year term versus a 4-year term, and also the alders' pay. I think it's important that we do a resume analysis and really have a robust conversation with the public. That to jump into this right away, understand what my colleagues and other people are saying, that it's important to have a longer term, given that in 2 years we're just getting our feet wet. Understand sometimes, I work 3rd shift in order to spend 30 hours doing council work. So I understand exactly what my colleagues are saying, but I am really big on making sure the public is engaged in every step of what the city business. And, we always hear about gerrymandering. We cannot afford to do anything as far as our districts involved, as far as without making sure the public is well aware, well involved, well engaged in the process. Thank you. So I would not be supporting this.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Bennett?
Yes, I have to second what I just heard, but more importantly, I'm a bit surprised that the city hasn't tried to gather more data or research or anything before deciding to make this change or before deciding to put this ordinance change forward. From what I have heard from my fellow council members that do support lengthening our Alder terms, their support for it is based off of their personal experience as being an Alder or experiences that they've heard. I understand that it is stressful to run again after 2 years. However, there are major trade-offs to that as well. And where is the data that shows that longer terms will actually accomplish better policy? Where is the data that shows that these longer term limits are actually going to produce what we want? Where's the data that shows that if we lengthen our term limits, that's not going to create barriers for people of underprivileged backgrounds to run for council? We have, I'm surprised that at this point, where are we 2-3 years out from starting this conversation, and we haven't even done a ResG analysis or even talked about racial justice and equity. Correct me if I'm wrong, but not only do I think that we need to gather data, I also think that we need to have strategic outreach to the community that is nonpartisan or that doesn't have a choice. Because from what it seems like to me, outreach to the community is on this issue is placed on us as Alders, and we all have our individual biases. Why can't we have staff members go out into the community, have listening sessions, see what they want their council to be made up of, rather than us just deciding broad-based off of our experiences what we think they should want? So no, I'm not supporting this. Not only because I don't support lengthening our terms, but also I think that if you want to give me a strong argument to support lengthening my terms, give me some concrete data that shows it's a good idea, rather than just your personal experience.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Tischler.
Yeah, well, I agree that staggering terms does make sense. There is a bit of a learning curve. I've been here now for 5 months. Can no longer call myself new, but it feels like an eternity at times. But the way it's written, I can't support adding 3 years when the past referendum people spoke only wanting to keep it at 2. So I'll be voting no on this, but I could see this as having 2 separate questions on a referendum, just so we have data looking at a future recommendation on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Let's see. Alder Wahilihi, I had you in the queue and then you dropped out, so we'll go to you next.
Thank you, Mayor. I couldn't agree more with Alder Bennett and Alder Miazzi. The referendum was sent out in 2021, and the constituents or our neighbors spoke, and they didn't want any change. And for us to come around and request another change, I think is taking the matter into our own hands. We are public servants. We are not career politicians. And I think there is a merit in just listening to the, constituents. And, like Alder Bennett said, it's not my own experience. That matters. What matters is what our constituents want. And our constituents spoke, and I don't think it's in the best interest of using city resources again to put in the referendum. Also to Alder Bennett, comment, we need to see the risk analysis. What are the implications? There can be some problem that can rise later on. What could be the impact? Unintentional consequence can happen and can be some impact there. So I think, what I'm seeing is, I'm not going to support this. And I don't think it's also clear explanation of what's happening. I don't know what's the whole purpose of it. If I don't, and I can't explain what this ordinance is or resolution is, then the public will not be able to understand. So I think if we really want to go that route of changing to 3 years, I think there's a process, and the long-term process should be taken into consideration. So I wouldn't be supporting this.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Harrington McKinney?
Madam Mayor, I'm still wanting to get the affirmative from you when a substitute can be moved forward.
Once you're in discussion, you can move a substitute at any time, Alder.
Okay. I would like to put forward the substitute motion to place agenda item 47141 to place on file without prejudice. And if I can have a second, I can speak to it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Go ahead, Alder.
Thank you very much. For discussion purposes, number one, there are many questions related to this item. The sponsors may be clear in their understanding of the why of this, what's before us now, but there needs to be more clarity, and that's what I've heard throughout. I don't believe this is ready for the finalization of a vote. And by placing it on file, many of the concerns, questions that have been placed forward by us as alders and understanding this clearly. And that is why I would like to place it on file so that we can go back and really provide the reasoning, the data, the understanding, and all of that that is necessary before we vote and place this on file, because this is going to affect future alders, future constituents, and I don't think that we're ready for it at this point.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, my question to you is, my comments were going to be on the substitute.
And so, Alder, because the substitute motion is just the inverse of the original motion, right? The original motion was to adopt. The substitute motion is to place on file without prejudice. It's still the same topic. So.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you for that clarification, Mayor. I will not be voting for this. And one of the reasons, and I'm not going to repeat everything, Alder Bennett hit all the key points that I wanted to talk about, and along with Alder Wahili and Alder Tischler. But this is extremely confusing. And I think that the 2-year term, even though I heard what the sponsors were saying about a 2-year term, but a 2-year term actually provides for a lot provides for the ability to come in as an alder, whether you want to stay one term or go for being reelected. But the flexibility in a 2-year term is actually a benefit. And just, I'm not going to go over what everyone else said because I agree with them, and I'm going to leave it at that. I will not be voting for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alder Fair.
Thank you. So I'll say that I think this is a very good idea. I think this 3-year terms on a rotating basis adds the ability for institutional knowledge within the council. It strengthens the body. And I think that's a really good thing for the future of the council as the city continues to grow. Challenges continue to get stronger and harder, and it's going to demand more out of this body. So I like that, and I also want to say I like that CCEC and all the work that TFOGS has done prior has put a lot of thought into this, and this is an outcome of that. Maybe not a direct outcome, but an indirect outcome of all that work. Which, just to remind folks, the idea of TFOGS goes back like 5 years at least, and this conversation goes back before that. So this hasn't popped up on anybody. I heard the idea of needing data, and I have no idea really what that means, like what kind of data data, whichever one you want to use, we would look at or try to find to try to decide if a 3-year term is better than a 2-year term. What is an effective alder? I mean, I don't really understand what we'd be looking for there. And the idea of engaging the public, we've talked, I know there's been a lot of talk about community engagement on this council before I got back on, and I understand, and I think there's real reason to think about, and I know you guys have thought about how generally the council can do better community engagement. And that's a worthwhile discussion and a worthwhile endeavor, and we should try to do better. But I also just think that we should remind ourselves and remind the public that they have a responsibility to engage as well. And so TFOGs were all open meetings as far as I mean, obviously they were. All the CCEC meetings were open public meetings that people could have engaged with and learned and understood what was being discussed for years about changing the council, thinking about changing the structure of government. That's been out there for a long time. And there's been all kinds of ideas batted around. And so here we are 2 nights in a row with some bold ideas. And I'm hearing a lot of the same discussion that I've heard for years about how we shouldn't move forward. We haven't engaged the public enough. I don't know, etc. So when will we ever make a bold move to strengthen the council so that we have more power, if you will? So that we are a stronger check on the mayor's office. Not necessarily this mayor's office, but in general. Sorry, just looking at my notes. The other thing is this will go to our constituents. This is just to advise a referendum, right? So they will get to decide whether they think 3-year terms are a good idea. And previously they decided that 4-year terms were not better than 2 years. They didn't say they didn't like 3 years. They just said, we don't think we like 4 years over 2. So we don't actually know if they would be okay with 3, but guess what? They would get the chance on the ballot in April. So you can tell I'm fired up about this. I've been fired up about trying to strengthen this council as a body. It's not about any one of us. It's about the institutional power and knowledge. And I think actually the debate that we're having, to just be very blunt, kind of shows that we need some more institutional power and knowledge on this council. I think if there's one thing that could have probably been done a little bit better in this process, we could have maybe received a little bit better communication. And I know how hard your jobs are, and I know we all make mistakes, or we all just don't get to all the things, but maybe an email or like just kind of an update like, hey, CCEC has been working on this. council, this is coming up, this is what they decided, or this is what's coming forward. I mean, obviously it was introduced to your council, and then there was all kinds of meetings about it, so you can always check agendas and watch that to educate yourself, but maybe some clearer communication on this would have helped us to just be ready for this and not feel like we're blindsided, which we're not, but I understand that feeling. So if I had a criticism, that would be the only one. But I just think generally for the council, I'll say it one more time, this is a bold move. 3 years is, in my opinion, a good amount of time, staggering it so you have people who are on, who can mentor, who can lead, and help those new folks along is just a really good idea, and I would be supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Evers?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Alder Fair, for those comments. And I agree with much of what you said. And let me go back to those who find this very confusing. I would ask if you took the time to go back and watch the CCEC meetings. If in reading the agenda, you didn't understand what we were to vote on tonight, if you reached out to the sponsoring alders, if you did your homework. To me, it's plain, it's clear in the writing what is being suggested. To increase terms, they're not term limits, but terms to 3 years, and then to stagger those terms. Now, the rationale for that did not just come because alders were individually frustrated or had an emotional peak or complaint about, not wanting to have to run after 2 years. This came out of TFOGs, which met 90 times over a 2-year period. And the suggestion by Alder Bennett that there's been no Res-G analysis, the whole TFOGs process led by Justice Castaneda was infused with the Res-G analysis to try to come up with an effective common council that can better represent all parts of our city. Regarding what Alder Miazzi said, that we need to make sure that the public is engaged in every step of the process. We're not unilaterally voting this for ourselves. We're voting to take this to the voters, to our constituents, to the city. The advisory referendum that took place in 2021, it was advisory, it wasn't binding. Second, it did not address this particular item. It gave a choice between a 4-year term and a 2-year term. And the issue of staggered terms was not addressed at all. I very much agree with Alder Fair that we have an opportunity here to do something that would increase the effectiveness of this council and would provide a solution to one of the challenges we have when we have big turnover, when we have half the alders coming in who have very little idea of what's going on and have the remaining alders trying to help them out. I think this is a worthy idea to put out to the voters. I would encourage you again, I'm going to finish with what I started. If there's a question you have that you find something too complicated or too complex, it's incumbent upon you as an alder to go back and ask questions and to study and to watch the hearing, the CCEC meeting. And then we can have a more robust and effective debate and really make a good decision. So I'm going to vote in favor of this, but I would encourage all of us to come together and to see that this is done in goodwill, and it's an extension of the 2 years of hard work, 90 meetings in 2 years of TFOGs to really try to improve Common Council. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. President Furman.
Thank you. Last two alders took a bunch of my points, but I greatly appreciate them saying it. People have probably heard me say this before. One of the most frustrating things about the TFOG's work is there is no right answer. That's very, very frustrating because it's incredibly unclear. Should we do this or should we do that? But one of the things that was very clear in TFOG's is the current system doesn't work. You can go read the TFOG's report. It goes into a lot of detail about our issues as a government and our issues as a city and why there is such a push for change. I want to reiterate, the referendum questions, I don't know how, if, I was certainly involved in helping figure out those advisory referendum questions, but one of the most interesting things that have come out of that is how everybody interprets the answers to those questions however they wish. And this is one of them. I mean, the question wasn't, do you want 2? Do you want 3? The question was very specifically, do you want 4? And we heard 55% of people said they didn't want 4. They didn't say they wanted 2. They didn't say they wanted 1. They didn't say they wanted 3, etc. Term limits is another one, by the way, which really bothers me. That very specifically said if we became full-time, should there be term limits? And a lot of people run around and say, everybody wants term limits. The question was very specific about full-time and term limits. People can choose to interpret, obviously, things any way they want, but let's be clear about the question. I heard a request today for data to figure out whether or not this would work. I wish there was any way to do that. If somebody has a suggestion on how to collect data on whether or not we'd get better outcomes by being 3 years or 4 years or 2 years or 1 year, whatever it is, I'm all ears. I think, to me, the only way to do that is to try it. And that's one of the frustrating things. Obviously, it takes a long time to try something and see whether or not it works or doesn't. But I do think TFOGS does have a lot of information on why our current system doesn't work. If people have suggestions on different ways to do this, speak up. Let's talk about that. If people have suggestions on different ways to do engagement for this, please speak up. Let's do that. I do apologize as somebody who's been involved in this, having not done better communication before this meeting, but we've got time. And so if people want a meeting about this, they want more public engagement about this, let's talk about what that looks like. But also, let's be clear, this is a decision that we are asking our residents to make. It's not a decision we can make on our own. And so if our residents ultimately don't like this idea, this will fail and the system will stay as is. But the idea that we're forcing this on anybody or there aren't more avenues for engagement, even if we pass this tonight, is just simply not true. This will not pass if we don't properly explain this to people. That's actually probably one of the big flaws of the whole TFOG's non-binding referendum questions is we tried to do discussion and engagement about it, but it was incredibly hard. We had very little time period and there were complicated questions. I will never forget having a council meeting, having the chair of TFOG say it took her 2 years being part of the TFOG's committee to finally understand that full-time alders worked. The second she said that, it was concrete to me that there was no way our residents were all of a sudden going to realize that full-time alders made sense. I've spoken to alders that are on the council currently that got elected in 2021 that have made it clear to me that before they had this job, they had they were strongly against the full-time, and once they were in it, they recognized, oh my gosh, this is really hard to do part-time. So engagement on this stuff is incredibly hard. That is not lost on me, having been part of this process. I am open to suggestions, but the idea that we are forcing this on anybody or that there wouldn't be further engagement, even if this is passed tonight, is just simply wrong. And so I encourage people to provide constructive feedback tonight or in the future. There is no right answer, but hopefully we can figure out a better path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Conklin.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to all my colleagues. I am a supporter of this, and I would really hope that my other colleagues would really support this. I think what this is about is our lived experiences. How would we ever know how long a term should be if we've never been in this position? How would we know if the 40 or the 55% of the folks who voted against the 4-year term? I can probably guarantee not 0.1% of those folks have ever sit on the Common Council. So I agree that there needs to be some more education around this, but the things that we've been doing so far have not been working, and it's time for a change, and yeah, we want to give it up to our constituents. It's not just our sole decision. This is about getting this out to our constituents. And with that being said, there needs to be education along with that. But this has been in the works for a long time. The TFOGS has done many, many hours of meetings and outreach and engagement. So things have been happening for a long time, but I think it's time for us to educate our constituents and get this out there so they can really understand that this does take more time than any other job that I've probably ever had in my whole entire life. So I appreciate everything that President Furman has said and Alder Fair has said, but we got to try something different. These 2-year terms are not working. I think this has been said before, like, we're just now getting comfortable. Well, at least let me speak for myself. I'm at least just getting comfortable in this position. I've been here almost 18 months, and now I have to think about running an election again, or a campaign again, excuse me. And so when campaign season is here, then that's overwhelming and that's a lot of work, but we still have to do the work of the city. So having those 3-year terms and staggered like that will give this council and this body the support that it needs to be successful. I think this council isn't set up for success if over 50% of the council members are changing every 2 years. And I think with our lived experiences and what I'm learning is that things are slow. It's a slow process at the city and things take time. So I think many of us know that we can't see the changes that we want to see within our 2-year term. How is that left for us to leave any type of legacy if we only get elected for 1 term? Yeah, I think I'm just going to leave it at that, but I really wish that my fellow colleagues will support this. This is important to at least get this out here to our constituents and let them decide after they have been educated on the things that we need to make the city a better place. So thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Benford?
Thank you, Mayor. I hope you're doing well, and all my colleagues. This has been really an interesting conversation, and I deeply respect and appreciate everybody's opinions. And while I might not agree with everything my colleagues have said, Mayor, I think that just this conversation alone, I would contend that we're not so broken as maybe we think we are. And Mayor, when we have these conversations, I'm often reminded that if any one of us, any 20 of us alders would go out in our district and randomly stop 10 people, and I've said this before, and say, hey, I'm new to town, who's my alder? We'd be pretty lucky if maybe 3 of that 10 would know. And that's no shade or no slam on anyone here. That's just the reality. And I think voting bears that out when we look at percentages. So the question is, how do we become relevant, doing our jobs individually and collectively, so more people know what an alder is or who their alder or what we do? And I'm not going to sit here and say it's not hard work. And, everything is relevant to me. Relevancy plays a key role. And when I look at some of the suffering and hard jobs that other people have to do, I feel pretty honored. And I want to say it again. I don't think that we're so broken. Now, I support this, and I want to say why. It's been mentioned before, and simplistically, you do get elected. In the beginning, there's a learning curve, and it's different for everyone. I have to say, I get it where there's institutional knowledge, and that's really important. But I believe you can get that. I don't, and I don't want to sway into any conversation about term limits or anything like that. But each individual, it's different what they bring to this. And I shared last night, and I've shared 100 times before, that leadership and why we do this job is different for each of us. And for me, it's real personal that, yeah, it is a very hard job. And that's why I don't think you should stay in it long. That's just my personal opinion, that it behooves us to reach behind and bring in new leadership. And turnover, I don't necessarily think that's horrible, because once again, we each bring our own wonderful intersectionality that makes us to this job. So the reality is you get elected, you're learning, and then, you jump into campaign mode. And that takes a lot of time. Unless you've done it, I think most people wouldn't have a clue of just the psychological, emotional, and physical impacts of just running for any public office, even these local alder races. So I think 3 years is reasonable. But what I worry most about throughout all of this conversation is what happens to District 8? What happens to students? Their voice, at least my time as an alder this term and in the past, that voice from District 8 was crucially important and helped, I got to just say, honestly, push the city to do some really remarkable things. So that's something I worry about. But I can find solace in the fact that I think there's some confusion that if we are going to put this to referendum, while I deeply appreciate all my colleagues' insights and perspectives, I've said it before, and once again, this is no slight on this body, but I put more trust in our constituents. I put more trust in the people of the city of Madison who will vote on this. So the question is, while we craft the referendum, and I appreciate Alder Bennett before recognizing that maybe this is 2 questions on the ballot, but during that period, there will be plenty of time for education, plenty of time for outreach. And, whether it's here as alders for the city or at the state level or at the federal level, there's an inherent distrust of us policymakers. I know I'm stating the obvious. So people will talk about this. People will want to know, and we'll have opportunities to not only talk about why 3-year terms might be good or why we should stay to 2 years, but hopefully it opens doors for other considerations. And I want to say it for the 3rd time, Mayor, I don't think we're broken. I don't think we're such an awful institution. Anytime you bring 20 people with different backgrounds together, no matter the context, there's just going to be friction. There's just going to be conflict. So I think that this is healthy for democracy. If we stagger this, then we talk about what we do during these elections, that people were more relevant. And I know that's outside of necessarily our scope. It involves the media and other things that will draw people to public policy. But I support this. And it goes to referendum. So we're not saying tonight that, boom, we're going to go 3 years. And last night I was very opposed to increasing alder wage for many of the same reasons that I bring this forth. But I think that I would hope that my colleagues would support this because we would have that opportunity, I believe, to get some work done in the time that we're elected. And then, my friends joked the other day about the 4-year term. They're like, if you're crappy for 4 years, we're stuck with you. So 2 years might be manageable or 3 years might be manageable. So it stinks that folks are thinking of it in those terms, but I believe 3 years would give anybody an opportunity, whether it's 1 term or 6 years or 9 years, to really leave a legacy of serving the city. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Paulson.
Thank you. So I've been attending CCEC when this topic has come up. I think I've been here long enough now that you started to know me and know that I really like numbers and this sort of stuff. So I've been following along closely. I don't think it's critical. I would not come and tell my colleagues that, if you had been paying attention, you needed to go to CCEC and it's, tut not going. Because I think actually what the discussion at CCEC was that, we've been batting it around a little bit, but at some point the council is going to want to sink their teeth into this and really get into this and start talking about a couple of the questions in here, 2 years versus 3 years, staggered versus not staggered? Should it be a 2-3-4 kickoff cycle or a 1-2-3 cycle? In fact, that was explicitly sort of like, let's not even try to solve this at CCC. Let's just kick it over to council and we'll have a discussion there. So I think the actual motion before us is a substitute to turn this into a place on file. And I would certainly urge us all to set that aside for at least for now, to continue this discussion, because I have an amendment that I think is actually very important to this, because I think one of the lessons from 2021 is that we have to be really clear what we're asking. And so I'm very hesitant to ask 2 questions and try to get some feedback, because I'm not sure that it's difficult to take things away from it. I think we're kind of at a point now where we need to come up with what do we want. What do we want to ask our constituents for a choice in direction? And I think we want to make that very simple. And so one of the things I'd actually like to change in this, or what's before us, is right now we've got a 2-3-4 cycle to get onto a stagger. So there's this weird term for 1/3 of the council that does a one-off 4-year term, longer than the regular 3-year term. And I think that's actually been part of why folks have been struggling looking at this. Like, what the heck is going on here? Why is there a 4-year term in this? Whereas I think if we had approached it as a 1-2-3 kickoff cycle, everyone would kind of understand. It's like, okay, well, we're going to go from 2 years to 3 years, and we're going to stagger it. So we got to stagger it a little bit in the first way. And the way we're going to do it, we're going to have a 1-year wave, a 2-year wave, and a 3-year wave. And then at the end of that, everyone's back on to 3 years. And so I actually think it's easier to understand. It will be easier for the voters to understand what are we asking if we were on 1-2-3 instead of 2-3-4. So I would like to offer an amendment at an appropriate time to switch this text to go back to that 1-2-3. It does, yes, put someone on an election cycle right away that they get elected in 25, and then 1/3 of them get stuck with an election rate again at 26, and the 2-3-4 cycle avoids that. But I think from a clarity standpoint, it's better to ask 1/3 of the alders to take one for the team and have a slightly shorter term to have to go back out there again, because I think it's easier for the voters to understand what's happening. That the request from the direction that the council thinks that the direction that the council is putting forth is either we stay on our current path or we go to a 3-year staggered term. And I think it's easier to see that in a 1-2-3. The other thing I would broadly say tonight is that I hope we continue this discussion, and I would hope that we keep having a little bit more discussion about other items. Should it be 2 or 3 years? Like, is that something we actually do want to consider? And maybe we want to kick this back to CCC and ask them to come back. I think the timing works to be able to still do this and have a little bit more discussion at CCC or some other format. So we could still get on the ballot for the spring election in 23. But I really think it's important that either tonight we start talking about what are people's preferences, 2 or 3, is staggering really what folks want. And I hope that's kind of what we spend the next however long we're going to do this thinking about, rather than like, we're not ready, let's just put it on file. Let's spend some time and have some discussion. What do people think about this? Because that's what CCEC actually said, right? We said, well, let's stop the discussion in CCC and move it over to the council to get everyone's opinion, and let's continue to get folks' opinion and keep this discussion going for a little bit. And maybe the mayor will be generous on speaking twice, because I think this is worth maybe ignoring that rule to be able to have a little bit more robust discussion in this friendlier format. Because I think one of the other things to consider, I think staggering in groups of thirds and 3-year terms is probably better, but I think a question in front of the voters to stick with 2-year terms but stagger it into 2 halves, I think that passes in a slam dunk. I think that's super easy. I think they go for it, and we have no question. Everything we've talked to them about before seems to say that that's close to what they want, and I think staggering is crucially important. It's helpful that I'm sitting next to Mr. Institution, and any question I have, he's seen it 7 times. But having that experience, having a guarantee that the council always has experience when folks come in is, I think, vital to the future of the council, and we have to stagger. I think we really, really have to stagger, and I think we have some options for should it be 3 years or 2 years, and what do folks think? But staggering, I think, is crucially important, and that's the one thing that I want to for sure get to the voters, and how else we get there is a little bit less important to me. I think 3 years is better than 2 years, but I am persuadable on that, and I would love to hear what more folks think. So that was a long ramble, and I appreciate this body's indulgence.
Thank you, Alder. Speaking of, Alder Bennett, for the second time, but I will note that I'm not timing anyone. Alder Bennett?
I just had a question. Wait, I'm sorry. Did Alder Paulson have an amendment or?
No, Alder, because the motion before us is to place on file without prejudice, that's not something that's amendable.
Okay.
So if that motion is disposed of in the negative, then we would come back to the substitute, which could be amended.
Okay, I see. Yes, because again, I think that staggering and 2 versus 3 year terms are two different things. But for the second time, I did want to respond to some things I said because I thought it was kind of problematic. First and foremost, I think it is an extremely privileged take to claim that anyone that in our city has access to attend one of our TFOG's meetings, and they could have had their voices heard. If you are someone that can barely get food on the table, I can guarantee you the last thing you're thinking about is going to a TFOG's meeting. We have an issue with our city in their accessibility to folks, especially those of underprivileged backgrounds. So for anyone on this council to claim that, oh, you could have just attended a committee meeting and had your voice heard is just an extremely privileged take that I think we need to, as an entire council, move away from for any committee on any issue. Secondly, it's kind of concerning that we as a city don't know how to gather data. I mean, we are not the only city in the nation. There are plenty of other cities that we can look towards that have 2 versus 4 year terms that we can gather data from and see how it works in their cities and see predictability, how it will work in our city. So it's just surprising that we don't know how to gather data in this city.
Alder, can I ask you to pause? Alder Harrington McKinney has a point of order.
Is that I've noticed that some alders have had the opportunity to speak several times, and I've been in the queue, and I just want to know where I fall in the queue.
Alder, at the moment, you are second to last in the queue. We had at one point, I think, 7 alders in the queue, and we are working our way down.
Thank you. I just need
Thank you, Alder. So if you'd, I'm
patient, very patient.
I'm going to turn your mic off, and if you would ring in again to stay in the queue. Thank you, Alder. I'm sorry, Alder Bennett. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, of course, data is not going to be perfect. However, I think there are plenty of lessons that we can learn from other cities about how things work in their cities. Also, I've not heard I've heard few solutions to the valid concerns that were brought up. Even in the TFOG's report, it noted that some of the concerns for 4 year terms was professionalizing campaigns, increased turnover, and discouraging people that don't know if they're going to be living in the same place they are 3 years from now. We think it's difficult to run again after 2 years. Imagine running a higher stakes professional campaign. Does that impact people that are underprivileged to run for council? We've had so much turnover in just 2 years over council. Imagine 3 year terms. Imagine someone that wants to do 3 years and then end up doing 6 years. Imagine the turnover for that. We have not provided a solution for that. We haven't provided a solution for discouraging people that don't know if they're going to be living in the same place they are 3 years from now. So and as for the ResG report, I think that it needs to be a specific report. Quite frankly, and this is a hot take, you can take it or leave it. I find it difficult to fully trust the efficacy of a built-in ResG analysis when I've just based off of this discussions during redistricting and leadership in redistricting, literally telling me that students should not have a voice in local politics. So I find it difficult to trust that TFOGs took those concerns into account when making their recommendations. I think that a specific report, and even throughout the TFOGs report, I found very little times where people of underprivileged backgrounds were noted in the TFOGs report. So I think that there should be a report as to how this would affect our makeup of council, and also what are the solutions to the valid concerns that were brought up. So that's where I have, and just frustrating. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Madison.
Okay. So I have a couple thoughts. I'm a weekend, or literally today, a weekend, but I've participated virtually in Common Council for as long as I've lived or long as we've been in the pandemic. And beforehand, I spent a lot of time coming to council, and especially these last couple of years that we've been online where I can just stream it on YouTube, I have. And so I've kept up despite not being an Alder. And so what I'm hearing as you all are starting this conversation is that you want certain outcomes, but it doesn't appear in the discussion, at least, that you're willing to make the investment. And sometimes the investment is in time, it might be in years, it might be in pay, but you are all speaking towards some sort of outcome, which a lot of it is engaging the public. I am very much a successful community engager, and that in of itself was not something I was able to do and get good at in under 2 years. It took me maybe 5 years to effectively engage the public in a way where I was able to use what they were telling me in order to build programming and just whatever I've accomplished successfully. So again, the outcomes that you all are asking for doesn't seem to match what you're speaking out loud. The investment doesn't match. And so you yourselves are admitting that residents weren't well educated previously in that referendum. So to me, that speaks to a failure just as a whole, not as an individual, but hey, we did not necessarily meet our goal to ensure that the public was educated about this referendum. So to me personally, that says that maybe as an Alder, as a body, I did not have enough time or education myself in order to effectively engage my district and my community. So to me, it's just sort of like, you're saying one thing, but hey, this is how we get here. And then I also think that you're not I think just hearing you talk about your residents or your community members, voters overall, it's almost as if you're assuming that they don't believe you to make great decisions that affect them. And maybe I'm hearing your discussion on this wrong, but the way that you're describing your community members who live in your districts, who elected you, the way that you're describing them tonight seems like you don't believe that they believe in you, if that makes sense. And so it seems to me when I vote, I vote because I believe this person is at least smart enough and talented enough to make good decisions on my behalf. Now, once they get in, things can change, but you just go and you make a different choice the next time around. So again, I feel that you're assuming that the folks who elect you are not smart enough to make good decisions by electing you to make decisions that affect them. And then to effectively engage the public, you don't get good at that. You just don't get good at that within a year or two. And then two, you're also saying over and over, I keep hearing engage in the public, engage in the public, engage in the public. And it sounds like, and then maybe I'm wrong about this, so I could have written this note incorrectly, but someone mentioned giving some of this off to staff. Well, then in the meetings that I've sat in recently and just on streaming YouTube at home, we're also saying that and some of us are not willing to bring City of Madison staff up to where, to their wages to be correct, like wage parity. So again, for me, and again, this is all how I'm hearing it, is that we are asking City of Madison staff members to take on more work to help us engage our public, but we are not willing to pay them yet adequately. So that, for me, it doesn't, like I'm sitting here a little confused on how this comes together or makes sense. So I think that's at least the notes that I wanted to get to, but I just want to really go back to, are you asking for the appropriate investments and the outcomes you want to see? So if you want a better engaged public, that demands an investment in time. It also has a financial investment, but right now we're talking about time. And as for most of you all who know me, and I absolutely know you all more than you may think I know you, I know that I am likely the most engaged in community in this space. And I've done that on purpose. And so I am telling you that for you all to be effective communicators with your residents, it takes time. And maybe you're unwilling or you're not interested in, sort of having that sort of investment. That's okay. I'm not, we all decide to do different things for different reasons. But again, I just want to reiterate, I absolutely support this in the respect that I know at minimum it takes about 3 to 5 years to get good at something. And also getting good at collecting data is more than submitting a survey. You have to collect both qualitative and quantitative data, and that is a skill. To be able to have a conversation and collect data in that without steering the person you're speaking with is also a skill that is not easy in the first year or two of engaging with the public. So again, the last time, you have to be asking yourselves, again, I support this. I very much mirror a lot of what Alder Fair has said, and I've stalked his conversations over the years in the respect that I respect all of you all. I really follow you I really want to understand how you consider the people that you serve. That's what's more important to me. And again, I just want to say, if you want an engaged district and you want people to be part of this process, then you yourself have to invest the time. And this is a question, if you put it to folks and you yourself get the time to educate them and you get the skill set to educate them, we are not a stupid community. We live in a very well-informed, well-educated city. And I think that you all have to give, I'm hoping that you will give the people in your district just a bit more credit. One, they elected you. Two, they're smart enough to make good decisions if you come to them with the education that they need in order to make an informed decision. And you yourself as an alder person you yourself and anybody who comes after you need time to be good. And maybe 3 years, my guess is at 2 years, you're gonna start feeling good. And then it's done potentially. So again, do the outcomes you want for your district match the investment you're willing to give? That's all I got.
Thank you, Alder. I hesitate to say this because often our rules actually inhibit our engagement, but unfortunately the conventions of the body ask you to address your comments to me and not to your fellow alders. So, in the future. Alder Miadzi is next.
Thank you, Mayor. In order to keep things, how should I say it? You just mentioned something that I was going to address. I asked point of order before because my name was mentioned out, and so I was just wondering, how do you want us to address point of order in the future?
I'm sorry, Alder. I didn't hear. I have yet to hear an alder call out another alder by name. I do try and catch that if it happens, but just in general, I would remind the body that you are to address your comments to me. It is acceptable to talk about all their alders. Don't misunderstand. But when you do, we request that you talk about them with respect and obviously with their title, as opposed to their first name.
Okay. Well, I guess the gist of what I'm trying to say is that it's important. There was a lot of things mentioned, and I don't know exactly where to go from here, but I know that it is important that we have the engagement of us working together and being honest about everything. The TFOGS group that was very, did a lot of work, but at the same time, when you look at the referendum, this issue was voted down. Granted that they did a lot of work, the same TFOGS group had a few alders of color that resigned from it because things were not looked at from an equity lens, from their point of view. So I'm not taking any credit from the work they did, but at the same time, we must still listen to the people of this community. If we do another referendum, but before we give it to our people to decide, we should be able to have a say in it. So if we're saying as a body, quite a few of us, that we're not in agreement and that we more and more engagement, more knowledge about to sit down and dissect this as a group, as a common council, 20 people that sit on this common council, it's important. There's other comments that were said as far as having if our community wants to know more, they have a right to engage the Common Council, Executive Committee, or any other group. It's also our job to take the knowledge out to our constituents, the people that cannot be here. So I'm not trying to disrespect any one of us, but I'm saying that we have to work together. There's alders I haven't even spoke to on this Common Council. So we have to work together in order to, if there's something we want to get passed, not all of us alders have been engaged in this process or called out and said, you know what, I agree with everybody here that we do work a lot of hours on the Common Council. We might be underpaid. I agree with them about the terms because I'm just now getting my feet wet, and I'm glad about all the things that are going on North Side. But at the same time, I want my community to be engaged in all the process that I'm doing. And I think it's only fair to ask everybody to make sure that we're engaging upon one another as colleagues and really trying to make sure that we do the city business in an equity lens. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. I just want to offer a slight clarification. The TFOGS body that most of folks have been referring to this night was the original TFOGS committee. I don't believe there are any resignations from that committee. I think you're referring to the TFOGS implementation group that was just a group of alders, not including residents, that there were resignations from. Next, I have Alder Tischler.
Thank you, Mayor.
For the second time.
For the second time, and I'll be brief. Yeah, I agree with other alders. I come from a district that I never underestimate their intelligence and how informed they are. But I think what I want to know to make an informed decision is the difference between 2 and 3. And I think that's really what once we have that information, do they want keeping the status quo or looking at 3? Then I'll be able to make a decision and move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Alder. All right. Next, Alder Harrington McKinney. For the second time.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm going to follow my colleague's reference. I'm going to read my notes. First of all, I want to thank Alder Haley for pulling this from the consent agenda, because we've had a very, very robust discussion of this, and I want to acknowledge that. The second thing that I want to refer to is that much discussion has been made about the TFOG's report, and thank you for clarifying the two phases of it, because I was on the implementation and not on the original TFOG's group. There was, and I read the document several times, and what we have not done is to look at reducing the boards, committees, and commissions. That was a key part of TFOGs as well, and I feel that has been omitted. The next thing I want to address is it had been mentioned the lack of or the importance of institutional knowledge. And I could say on my behalf, Madam Mayor, is that sometimes there is selective sharing of what that institutional knowledge can be. It is really imperative that there is a robust onboarding of alders and training. I heard one of the comments says that we were elected by constituents, but I believe that each of us that's sitting here, we're highly intelligent. We want to do the business of the city, and we're committed to the business of the city. And we really do need to look at how we are preparing, whether there's a rotation or staggering. It is critical that all of the 20 alders have the opportunity to perform at its best, and that is in the onboarding. It was mentioned about and Alder Paulson mentioned this, is that even with the referendum, if 4 years is put in that sequence, I believe that that would be the focus, not the 1, not the 2, not the 3, not the years, but the focus will be on the 4 years. And so we really do need to be very, very succinct in what that ask is. And I know that the city attorney said that he would be drafting that, but that doesn't necessarily have to come back to us. And Alder Fair said, suggesting that that comes back to us. The another item I want to bring up is that, yes, the TFOG's report said that the current system does need work. I think that everybody agrees on that. But the final thing that I want to say, and I am addressing you, Madam Mayor, and not any of my alders, is that I had a sense of condescending comments at one point, the suggesting that, alders need to do their homework. Because all of the CCEC meetings are recorded virtually, there is an opportunity, maybe you're not in the room when the meeting is held, but to suggest, Madam Mayor, that alders are not doing their homework sounded very condescending to me, and I just needed to make sure that I make reference to that. I don't think that any of us are sitting in this space and we don't do our homework. The fact that there has been so much discussion around this item says is that it's a great idea. No one said that it's not a great idea to have the rotation of aldership. But what it does point out is that there needs to be better clarity. And I don't think that we're ready for that. And I just wanted to make sure that I put that into the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter for the second time.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll be super quick on this. This discussion tonight seems to me that it should have been at the committee of the whole versus taking up undue amount of time on the agenda, which I don't believe this is the last item on our agenda. With that said, I believe the discussion was necessary. I believe all voices should be heard. And we just said the other night how much work it takes to be an elected official. And I have to echo what Alder McKinney said, Harrington McKinney said, because we don't necessarily have the time to attend every meeting. And for those who do have the time to attend every meeting, congratulations. Discussion, whether here or in a committee or with the committee of the whole, is so vitally important that we hear and listen, and sometimes hearing and listening are two different things. I still won't be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to be very, very brief. I just want to add to the conversation about the past referendums, the past referendum results, and it seems like we are attempting to use that to persuade people one way or the other. I think it's important to recognize that 24,000 people, over 24,000 people on that referendum voted in favor of changing the terms of the council. So it wasn't like 90% against 10% or whatever. It was a 45% vote. So there is a lot of interest in our community to make those changes, and I don't see what I understand the concerns about how to formulate the questions, and I think Attorney has already mentioned that since we're doing this now, we have time to actually formulate the questions and bring them back to council before they go into the ballot. So I get the question concerns, but I think we should definitely put this back to the voters with the new terms that we are offering, and let the voters decide what they think is best. But again, I want to say it again, over 24,000 people voted saying that they wanted different terms. So it wasn't a slam dunk on this particular question. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Foster for the second time.
My first time, Mayor. Yeah, I'm going to speak to this. It sounds like the bulk of the discussion is happening on this motion. I wanted to call out a couple things. Number one is the purpose of this referendum, and I really appreciate and want to uplift what Alder Madison suggested, or my understanding of that, which I would agree with. This is not an advisory referendum, and I believe that it's generally our job as the legislators for the city to be putting forward and generally passing without referendum legislation for the city. Because of the special nature of this specific proposal, it has the extraordinary step of actually getting voted on by voters in order for it to pass. But in my mind, this is not something that we're kicking off to the voters. If alders don't support this proposal, I don't think you should approve of it tonight to simply put it out there for voters. I think that voters do expect us to do the work, to do the deep dive policy, and to put forward something that we believe in. So this is something that I believe in. I'll be supporting it. And I think that we will be giving the public an opportunity to approve it, but we should not be sort of thinking of this as passing the buck and letting them decide. I think they are counting on us to put forward smart proposals, and I think this is one of them. I do not support placing this on file, and I also do not support a couple of the suggestions that have come up. Perhaps they'll come up as amendments, and I'm just going to speak to them right now. this idea of splitting the question and of 2 versus 3 years and staggered terms as a separate thing. I agree they're 2 separate things. This was discussed at CCC. I support the proposal for one specific concrete proposal. It's completely impractical to put multiple versions of this out to voters. This is, again, not an advisory referendum. This is a proposal that, if adopted, would go into effect. In order to do that, we would have to say, okay, do you support 2 years staggered? Do you support 3 years not staggered? Do you support 3 years staggered? And 2 of those could pass with a majority of votes. And so then what do we do with, yes, I support 2 years staggered and I support 3 years staggered. And we have a majority passing in both cases. It's just not practical. And so we need to put forward our best recommendation and put that to the voters. I also don't support kicking this back to CCEC. I think there was great discussion there on multiple meetings, and I get not everybody has a chance to attend those or even to review them, but this has been really thoroughly discussed. And as I think Alder Fair mentioned, in terms of process, I mean, this goes back formally to 2016, where I think it was Mayor Soglin that put forward a proposal to put this out to RFP, bring in a consultant to look at government structure, which failed. Ultimately came back in the form of an ad hoc committee in 2017, which was passed. We've heard, nearly 100 meetings over years, 30 plus recommendations from that group with a deep focus on racial equity in particular. Then the TFOG's implementation group in 2020, finally passing on the last, I think there were like maybe 4 of the 30 plus recommendations that really hadn't been addressed yet, passing those on to CCEC, including this one, which the Common Council formally gave the charge back to TFOG's implementation, again, that was passed on to CCC, to come back to council with recommendations for any further referendum questions following the advisory referendum questions. So this is not coming out of nowhere. This is, over the course of many years. And so we're talking from, again, 2016 to saying, hey, this system's broken. Let's do some deep thinking to figure out what's going on and what we can do. And here we are in 2022 with a decision that would go to the voters in 2023 that, if approved, wouldn't start to be implemented until 2025 and would take 3 years to even get fully implemented through the staggering. And so it feels a little frustrating, and it does feel a little disingenuous. And it's something that I've heard a lot here, which is if you don't support something, start talking about process, start talking about slowing things down, start talking about we haven't done enough engagement. And, there's certainly a number of times when that might be fair criticism, but it's just, sometimes it feels like it's a different way of saying no. And I really wish, if folks don't support this recommendation, I think that's totally fair, but just, say that or don't say it, vote yes or no. If you've got specific critiques, if you want it to be different, let's just focus on that. And I think this idea that this is coming out of nowhere, that it's too fast, that it's too confusing, that we just have to stop, we're never going to change anything. I mean, even a bunch of folks trying really hard, we're going to be almost 10 years from saying, let's take a look at this system, to maybe having one change implemented in our structure. So, this is here. Let's do this tonight. I do not support placing on file, and I fully support passing it as recommended by CCEC. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Fair? For the second time.
Yep, second time. It'll be real quick. I just was going to say I wanted to just uplift some things that have been said with a very simple thing. Words of encouragement. Don't be afraid to lead. Don't be afraid, and it's what Alder Foster just said, to make a decision and live with it. That's why we were sent here or appointed. Don't be afraid to make a decision and be a leader.
Thank you, Alder. I have no other Alders in the queue wishing to speak. So the motion is to place on file without prejudice agenda item number 36. All those in favor of placing on file will say aye. Those opposed to placing on file will say no as your name is called. I'm sorry, Alder Paulson?
I just want to make sure that I clarify that if this motion fails, we're simply back to the original motion to.
That's correct. If the motion to place on file fails, then we come back to the original motion, which was to adopt the substitute. So again, all those in favor of placing on file will say aye. Those opposed to placing on file will say no as your name is called, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Alders Harrington McKinney? Aye. Aye. Heck? No. No. Madison? No. Miadzi? Aye. Paulson? No. No. Fair? No. No. Tischler? Aye. Verveer? No. No. Vitiver? No. No. Wahalia?
Aye.
Aye. Abbas is excused. Benford?
No.
No. Bennett?
Aye.
No. Carter?
No, I said yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Alder Bennett said aye. Thank you. Alder Carter?
Aye.
Aye. Conklin?
No.
No. Vice President Curry? No. No. Evers?
No.
No. Figueroa Cole? No. No. Foster?
No.
No. President Furman?
No.
No. Madam Mayor, 6 ayes, 13 noes, and 1 excused.
Thank you. With 13 noes, the motion to place on file without prejudice fails. We are back to the main motion, which is to adopt the substitute. Alder Paulson.
Yes, I'd like to make an amendment to change the 2-3-4 cycle to a 1-2-3 cycle, and I will email that text right away.
There's a move to amend. Is there a second?
Second.
Right, to moved and seconded to amend to be 1-2-3 terms instead of 2-3-4 terms. On the amendment, are there questions? Or I'm sorry, Alder Paulson, do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I'll just explain it real quick. The amendment, you see that there's now yellow highlighted 1s, 2, and 3s. It's a little bit messy because the original motion had 1, 2, 3, then the substitute turned it to 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, and now I'm turning that back into 1, 2, 3. So I hope it's kind of understandable in the form I presented it, but I didn't quite like double strike or anything to make it too bonkers. But it would in 2025 have a 1-year term that comes back up again in 2026 for a 3-year term, and I guess I can leave the mayor to explain it if there are questions. But yes, I think, well, I will discuss it more in discussion if that's appropriate, or I can keep going and discussing why I think this is good now.
Alder, we only have one other Alder in the queue, so I would take your time if you want to use it.
Okay. I think we should, there may be other amendments, and we may have a discussion about 2 versus 3, but I think what we should talk about right now is if we're going to have 3 and staggered, can we solve the question of should we have 2, 3, 4 for that initial staggering, or 1, 2, 3 for that initial staggering? And I think 1, 2, 3 is the thing that will make it easier for the public to understand. I think it'll be easier for us to explain. I think it's more clear. I think it doesn't have a weird 4-year term that doesn't exist anywhere else in the universe of our goal of getting everyone to 3-year terms. And so I think this is the cleanest way to do it, with the downside of asking 1/3 of the council to immediately stand for re-election again in the council that is elected in 2025 to ask them to one-third of them to immediately stand for re-election in 2026. And I think the trade-off of having a easier to explain and understand for the public is worth that additional pain for the future council. And so I would urge you to support this if we move forward with the 3-year staggered term, that this is better than the 2-3-4 recommendation that came out of CCEC. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Evers?
Yes, I will not be supporting this amendment. We do have elected officials in our city who are elected to 4-year terms. I know of no person elected to an office that's just 1-year term anywhere. In fact, I'm not aware of it anywhere in the state. To me, the suggestion that we can't explain what is proposed here, that somehow staggered 2, 3, and 4-year terms, and eventually having 3-year terms or staggered 3-year terms is too confusing, doesn't really give credit to our ability to communicate to the public and the public's ability to understand. So I will not be supporting this, and I would suggest and ask my colleagues to vote against Alder Paulson's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Furman?
Thank you, Mayor. We talked about this at the Common Council Executive Committee, and so I apologize if I'm repeating some of that for the people that heard that discussion. The amount of time and resources it takes to onboard an alder, amount of time it takes for an alder, as we've heard this evening, to acclimate themselves to the job. The amount of money it takes and time it takes and toll it takes on candidates, families, the community, et cetera. 1 year is just not enough. So I don't support this change. I understand that 4 years is kind of odd, but I think it's a much better way to stagger it. There is no perfect way of doing this, but I do think the substitute that's suggesting 2, 3, 4 is the better way to go. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. I have no other alders in the queue wishing to speak on the amendment. Alder Paulson for the second time?
Yes, I will just note that in other cities that have switched to a staggered process, the approach that they've taken is to divide and do a group that does a 1-year term to go to that stagger. Going back to our history, when the Senate classes had to decide how they were going to split themselves up, they split into a 2-year, a 4-year, and a 6-year. When we have a vacancy on the council in the first year of the term early enough in that, that new alder immediately has to go back for re-election after that first year. So we already have their own precedents that you may have to run again in about a year's time. So this is not something that's crazy that no one else has ever done. We do it ourselves. Other cities have done it. When you are staggering, I think the sensible way that people expect to stagger is someone gets out a little bit in front, someone gets out a little bit longer in front, and someone gets all the way out in front. So I think the 1, 2, 3 story is the better story. It's the expected story, and I think it's kind of weird to say, well, it's too hard to run. So we're going to give that 1-year term a 4-year term to spare them the difficulty of running. I think it's a better story with 1, 2, 3, and I think it stands a better chance of passing. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. I have no other alders in the queue wishing. Oh, Alder Miadze.
Again, there's just too many things that I can think about why this is a terrible idea. I mean, so I would like to have more time to actually have a robust conversation with not just us alders, but also with the public that especially that elected us. I mean, for one thing, I mean, we have seen a lot of alders that have actually left the Common Council. Do we leave it to the CCEC to be able to elect another person for the next 3 years? There's a lot of conversation I need answered, and I cannot support something I do not know about. So to have so many questions and so many answers to be answered and not to have a robust conversation with the public, it's not that we don't want to lead, just too many unanswered variables to this equation that I will not leave just unanswered and just go in like blindly. So I still will vote no for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Now I have no other alders in the queue wishing to speak on the amendment. So once again, the amendment is proposing, instead of staggered terms that begin with 2, 3, and 4 years, to have staggered terms that begin with 1, 2, and 3 years. All those in favor of the Paulson amendment, aye. Those opposed, no. As your name is called, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Alders Harrington McKinney? No. No. Heck? Aye. Aye. Madison? No. Miadzi? No. Paulson? Aye. Aye. Fair? No. Tischler? No. Verveer? No. Vitiver? No. No. Wahilia?
No.
No. Abbas is excused. Benford?
No.
No. Bennett?
No.
No. Carter? Alder Carter, I think you're on.
No.
No. Thank you. Conklin?
No.
No. Vice President Curry? No. Evers?
No.
No. Figueroa Cole? No. No. Foster?
No.
No. President Furman?
No.
No. Madam Mayor, 2 ayes, 17 noes, and 1 excused.
Thank you. With 17 noes, the amendment fails. We're back to the main motion, which is to adopt the substitute. Is there further discussion? Alder Bennett.
Yes, I'm so sorry for like another 11th hour amendment, but this is an easy one. This is an easy one. So I just wanted to change, instead of having District 8 be in the 3-year term block, to flip that with District 5 and put it into, so that District 8 will have like the 2-year term, and then District 5 will have the 3-year term. And this kind of coincides with what I believe was discussed during CCEC and has been discussed before, about just the nature of District 8 being a primarily young people and student district, and how increased terms will affect who can run for office. So I know Attorney Hassett has already drafted the text, but I'm sending it to all alders as well. So,
Thank you, Alder Bennett. If you could send it to the clerk as well, that would be appreciated.
Yeah.
So the motion is to switch districts 8 and 5 so that in the initial phasing in, District 8 would have a 2-year term and District 5 would have a 3-year term. Is there a second to the motion? It's seconded by Alder Vitiver. All right. Questions, discussion? Alder Bennett, did you wish to speak to that additionally?
No, I think it's just a pretty simple amendment, and I'm very, very sorry. I know it's late, and I'm sorry for 11th hour amendment.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Evers?
Yeah, just real quick, Mayor. Thank you. Does the Alder have any interest in the 8th district Alder always being 2 years, or is this just for a preliminary before it goes to 3 years? Question for the mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Alder Evers. I'm unsure of the intent, so if Alder Bennett wishes to speak to it, she may.
It's just for the preliminary.
So simply for the preliminary phase-in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alders. Next in the queue, I have Alder Wahili.
Thanks, Mayor. If I'm looking at this spreadsheet, District 5 is still the preliminary 2025, 2026, and 2027 is 3 years. So is District 8. So I'm wondering if that's both districts have 3 years for the preliminary.
I do not have the chart in front of me. Attorney Haas, can you address the question?
I think Alder Foster has his hands up.
The original draft had a 2-year term, initial 2-year term for District 5 and 3-year term for District 8. Alder Bennett's proposal is simply to flip those.
So we don't have the original one, right? That because the one I have is 3 years.
Alder Foster, can you clarify the chart, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And again, my apologies. I sent that out to give folks a general idea of the staggering. That does not reflect the recommendation for CCC to shift how they were assigned. And so what's being proposed is what's in Legistar and the ordinance language, and it does not match up with the staggering that's in the chart at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Thank you, Alder Wahili. Did that answer your questions?
Yes, and does that mean that will be updated, right, for the 2 years?
Well, so I think at this point, we can disregard the chart. It's just an example.
Okay.
What's important is what's actually written in in Legistar, and then Alder Paulson has a question about that.
Yeah, we just got an email from Alder Haas, Attorney Haas. I just wanted to clarify that was a cleaned up version of my amendment, which is now dead. And so don't look at that one.
Correct.
We're trying to figure out where anything is.
Right, I had sent that out previously. I don't know if Alder Bennett's going to send her amendment or wants me to.
Did you? I sent it, but it might not work. My email does not.
At least some alders have received it.
Mm-hmm.
Alder Bennett, do you want to send what? Anyway, it seems like
I received it, yeah.
There may be an error in what Alder Bennett sent. If Alder Vitiver is counting correctly, there may be a district missing. So we're going to ask Attorney Haas to just look at that, or Alder Vitiver if you want to email Attorney Haas. And we'll just stand informal while we figure this out. All right, never mind. All the districts are there. So it's getting to be it's not even that late at night, folks. Let's just clarify where we are. What's in front of us is the Bennett amendment to simply swap Districts 8 and Districts 5 so that District 8 would have an initial 2-year term and then subsequent 3-year terms, and District 5 would have an initial 3-year term and then subsequent 3-year terms. Alder Wahili on the question?
Yes, the Bennett amendment indicates there's a 4-year term. Is that how I'm reading it?
The only thing that would switch is the length of terms for Districts 8 and Districts 5. Everything else would remain the same as the initial motion. Does that answer your question, Alder?
Yes,
Yep.
thank you.
All right, thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out it's a bit confusing when you're reading the ordinance and not clicking on the more text. When it's condensed, everything is just mingled, but when you expand it, you can see the actual text clearly. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Alder. A word to the wise. Right, I have no other alders wishing to speak on the Bennett amendment. So let's try. On the Bennett amendment, is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of the Bennett amendment. So now we're back to the main motion, which is to adopt the substitute as amended by Alder Bennett. Is there further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, I'm going to anticipate that a roll call is required. And so all in favor of adopting the substitute as amended by Alder Bennett will say aye. Those opposed will say no as your name is called. And the clerk will please call the roll.
Alders Harrington McKinney? No. No. Heck?
Aye.
Aye. Madison? Aye. Miazzi? No. Paulson?
Aye.
Aye. Fair?
Aye.
Aye. Tischler? No. Verveer?
Aye.
Aye. Vitiver? Aye. Wahelia?
No.
No. Abbas is excused. Benford?
Aye.
Aye. Bennett?
No.
I apologize. Could you repeat, Alder Bennett?
No.
No. Thank you. Carter?
No.
No. Conklin?
Aye.
Aye. Curry? Aye. Evers?
Aye.
Aye. Figueroa Cole?
Aye.
Aye. Foster?
Aye.
Aye. Furman?
Aye.
Aye. Madam Mayor, 13 ayes, 6 noes, and 1 excused.
Thank you. With 13 ayes, the item passes, and we will move on then to number 37, which is legislative file 74328, which is amending the Madison General Ordinances related to the Police Civilian Oversight Board. President Furman, let's start with a motion, please.
Move adoption.
Moved and seconded to adopt. Are there questions for staff on item 37? Alder Wahili.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This was just a question to clarify. Currently, organizations that need to submit 3 names, what will this ordinance change? So just to know the process, but also how we can be able to educate our community, those are serving in the nonprofit when they are submitting names for this particular COB.
Thank you, Alder. Attorney Haas or Chief of Staff Kapusta Fofol?
I can start. The ordinance provides a solution if a community organization does not submit 3 nominations. In that case, the mayor and council leadership shall make an appointment from the pool of any eligible applications to submit for confirmation to the council. So that would address any concerns that a community organization that is designated does not submit 3 names.
Alder, does that answer your question?
Yes, to follow-up question is, for example, if organization just send 1 nomination, still that nomination will just go into the pool and that will not be selected automatically, right?
Well, the organization is not guaranteed that that person will be selected. Their name will be in the pool. They could be selected, but there is no guarantee that an organization that submits less than 3 names will have a representative selected.
And what was the reason that we are requiring 3 names per organization to submit names?
Well, that was part of the original ordinance when the Oversight Board was created. So I think the council just determined at that point that at that time that it wished to receive 3 names from each designated organization. I don't know if any of the alders have any other input, but that was the decision of the council at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is if we, I know the first time around, not only did the organization submit names, but we also outreach to the public. Is that going to be part of this again, to outreach to the public to apply to be on the Citizen Oversight Board?
I think Karen wants to address it.
Yes, Chief of Staff, Kapusta Pofal.
Hi, yes. We currently also did a press release to let the public know in this last round as well. And so I would expect that that would continue in that form or an improved form in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder Carter. Alder Harrington McKinney?
Yes, my question is for the city attorney, and in the language designated organizations, is there a process for adding to those the designated organizations? What would that process be, or is there a process?
Well, the ordinance states that there are 9 designated organizations. I believe the Oversight Board earlier this year communicated to the council that its recommendation was to stay with those same 9 designated organizations for this round of appointments. So the council could have changed those organizations, but it did not. And so the staff proceeded with requesting appointments or nominations from those organizations.
And the next opportunity for changing those designated organizations is at the completion of that round?
Well, the next appointments are the next year, Karen, or in 2 years?
I believe there will be an additional, some additional vacancies next year.
I believe, though, that the ordinance currently states that the list is to be updated at least every 2 years.
Yes.
So it could be updated for the next round if the council wishes.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any other questions on item 37? Seeing no other questions, it's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Alder Furman?
Thank you, Mayor. Since I have the attention of all the alders, I'm going to do a favor for staff and make it clear that a majority of alders have still not responded to the member appointment rankings. Those are due on Friday, November 4th at noon. So please, please, please check your email. There's a follow-up note from our chief of staff from yesterday at 4:47, extending the deadline, but please get your choices in. Thanks so much.
Thank you, President Furman. Is there further discussion on the motion? Seeing no further discussion, the motion is to adopt item 37. Is there objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Alder Harrington McKinney? Alder Harrington McKinney wishes to be listed as abstaining. Is that correct, Alder? Thank you, Alder. We'll list Alder Harrington McKinney as abstaining. Is there any objection to recording the balance of the council as in favor? Seeing no objection, that item passes. And that takes us to the end of our agenda. Unless there are announcements or introductions from the floor. Seeing none. Alder Harrington McKinney, it's your turn. So motion, is there a second? Don't really want to let that motion fail for lack of a second. It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of adjournment? Seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.